Hello, host Eric here, host Talking to Famous People. I would like to respond right now to the comment of one MatrixOne500. Says that INTP here. Intention is determined by the tangible physical processes taking place inside your brain. So supposing there was a way of detecting, categorizing, and analyzing one's brain and reproducing its exact structure in a simulation, tests could be performed that would determine this single brain's response to any specific stimuli. Now suppose we are also able to recreate the exact same outside stimuli and couple them with the exact replica of the brain in a specific moment. For example, if it were my brain, it would be recreated in this very moment when I'm typing a response and feeling my fingers pressing the key, recreate stimuli, and thinking of what to say next. Now supposing it's a simulation, do you think that if you reverse it and start it over and over again, my brain would act differently each time, that this reply would be worded differently for restart? Well, see, first of all, it's an interesting question, but all right, well, let's go from the top. Intention is determined by the tangible physical processes taking place inside your brain. First of all, there's no reason to conclude that the tangible physical processes taking place inside my brain aren't determined by my intention. There's no reason to assume it's the other way around. I mean, the thing is, part of the issue of determinism is there's an element of begging the question to it. It's like, it says, as you indicate here, it's like there are, in fact, tangible physical processes taking place inside your brain. That's true. There are also intangible metaphysical processes taking place inside your brain. Why are we assuming the physical processes cause the metaphysical rather than the other way around? So supposing there was a way of detecting, categorizing, analyzing one's brains and reproducing its exact structure in a simulation. Okay. Well, my point is, your metaphysical elements of cognition are distinct from the physical elements of cognition. So, even if you reproduce the exact structure in a simulation, and you reproduce the exact same outside stimuli, okay, well, let's look at this for a second. So, you've reproduced the exact structure, but you haven't put them in the same exact space, right? You have to, in fact, restart the simulation to put the same person in the same space again, right? You can't violate the law of non-contradiction. So the same person can't be in the same space, time, and context two different times, so to speak. But regardless of that, this notion of reproducing the exact structure in a simulation and tests would be performed that would determine the single brain's response to any specific stimuli. Again, it's begging the question. You're assuming that the response of the brain to any specific stimuli is a single response. There's a couple of ways that could be different than that, right? First of all, we know that there's sort of an involuntary cognitive process that occurs when you begin to tackle an idea, right? So you say, okay, well, should I buy the celery or the carrots? And in doing so, you maybe unwilled thoughts emerge about each of the things that are not thoughts you've chosen to elicit, not thoughts you've created, but thoughts that just emerged on their own into your brain. But then there's a conscious process that's distinct from that, in which you can say words in your head and say, I'm going to do this or this, and which one should I do? And you can come up with reasons and go with your gut or whatever, okay? So the fact is, regardless of whether you can simulate the exact brain and the exact circumstances, if in fact you're telling me that you're determining a brain's single response to the exact set of circumstances, it presupposes the thing we're arguing about, namely determinism. The only way that is possible that the brain has a single response, this single brain's response to any specific stimuli, there's not one response to it, or any specific set of stimuli. Even if you could make a simulation that's perfectly exactly the same as reality for us, and rerun the simulation multiple times, it would necessarily come out different times. Because remember, you're picking an arbitrary point in the process of the systems to say this is the beginning spot where we're going to measure from, and this is the end spot where we're going to count from. But there's a lot of elements of chaotic systems within the larger system that create necessarily randomness because definitionally they're irreducible causally. Now, we already know that there are elements of the system that can't be reduced causally, like, for example, an anthill. There's no specific cause that can be established as you can't establish any specific causal chain. All you can say is that at a certain point, the number of ants reaches some sort of critical mass, and they begin to make an anthill, right? An anthill is an emergent function of ant quantity. Ant quantity and location and other things like that, right? It's a bunch of different factors come into play to generate an anthill. Well, can you say, well, if we put the same ants in the same place, would they generate the same anthill? They'd probably generate another anthill, but it wouldn't be exactly the same. Because even if you could generate all of the same factors, start like an hour before they start building it, and then replay the whole simulation, the ants wouldn't make exactly the same anthill because there's randomness built into that system as well. There's randomness built into each system. Now, that does not prove free will. And it doesn't eliminate the possibility of determinism to a point, assuming that you can sort of module off the randomization elements that come into place from the emergent phenomena. Then you could say, well, and then the system will react according to this random result that comes out. Well, but then it can't possibly be predetermined because it's waiting on a variable to be defined. You see? So you can't recreate the exact set of circumstances because throughout the entire system are elements that are waiting upon random variables to be defined, and they are genuinely random. In other words, the randomness is built into the process of agency. It has to be, or else the system doesn't work, right? So the question is then, how does that randomness come into play for agency? We know it exists in, like, weather, for example. You can only predict so far out in weather. And we know there's lots of other chaotic systems which you simply, no matter if you knew every single detail of the system as perfectly as you possibly could, you still wouldn't be able to predict the system very far out. So given the fact that we know that randomness exists in the system, and we know that randomness is a component of human agency, the answer to your question is simply no. It wouldn't come out the same the second time. It absolutely would not. And number two, you can't recreate all the variables in a given system like that, even if this is a massive simulation. And it would make sense that eventually you can simulate something very, very similar to the existence that we're experiencing right now, and have entities be wholly convinced by the experience they're experiencing. Potentially you could do it from birth, and you would have an entirely matrix full of people, right? That's the notion. But the problem with that is, number one, we don't even know, first of all, that we're all coexisting in a single rendered universe. If we are, it would tend to imply the existence of God for sure, in my opinion, because then you need a single master observer. Now, it doesn't answer some of the underlying fundamental theological challenges of positing the existence of a God, but the other possibility, which doesn't require that, would be simply that each individual is rendering reality concurrently, and that there is some linkage by which the realities we render concurrently impact each other's reality on a physical level. There's permanence, and on a metaphysical level, there's learning, basically. So You know, it's like, so that's the answer to your question. You can't recreate every detail of a system at any moment of that system if the system is comprised of independently behaving agents with randomness built into their behavior. And it's just too massive of a construct, right? The processing power that would be required to have a single simulation being rendered in which we are all experiencing it concurrently would be prohibitive. It would be, I mean, that would be God. That would be the same thing as God, right? So, in that sense, it's much more likely we're rendering it concurrently and independently rather than existing in it concurrently and independently. And given that you're rendering reality concurrently and independently with other agents, it would seem then that the simulation is caused by the agent's free will, not a counter-argument to the agent's free will. Indeed, there's no reality beyond that we can understand through human observation and experience. If you want to posit an unobserved reality, you have to observe that unobserved reality hypothetically, metaphysically first, before you can say anything about it. It's impossible to posit an unobserved reality. It's impossible to posit any sort of reality that's not driven by human understanding. And thus, it would seem to make the most sense that human understanding is in fact, and human free will is the cause of, to the extent that there is such a cause, of the realities we concurrently inhabit parallel to one another in such a way that when we commingle with the other, our realities are seamless. And the physical space nature of a shared physical space reality is determined by observation is ultimately the source of the illusion of determinism, because that's what it is. It's an illusion that because some physical systems operate under the laws of reducible causality, that all systems must, and it simply isn't the case. So that's my answer to your very nice question. Thank you very much, MatrixOne500's. You're in the 500th matrix. They really got down to bare bones then. It's like the building's just like these half-assed looking squares and stuff like that. Anyway, MatrixOne500. So thank you for your engagement with my video, and I hope you enjoyed this response video. And good question.